last 1 week, India has managed the unthinkable in an act of what would seem like some kind of diplomatic jugglery. India has managed to draw praise from Japan, Australia, Russia and America, all in a span of 7 days. In fact, things seem to have become truly incredible when even of our neighboring country, Pakistan, decided that India's fine balancing act between Russia and United States for one is something that is definitely worth looking up to.
वाला हमारा मुल्क है हिंदुस्तान। मैं आज हिंदुस्तान को दाद देता हूं। इन्होंने हमेशा आजाद फॉरेन पॉलिसी रखी। आज हिंदुस्तान उनके साथ मिला हुआ उनका अलायंस है। क्वाड के अंदर अमेरिका का अलायंस की हुई है और अपने आप को वो कहता है मैं न्यूट्रल हूं। रूस से तेल मंगवा रहा है जबकि सैंक्शंस लगी हुई हैं, क्योंकि हिंदुस्तान की पॉलिसी अपने लोगों की बेहतरी के लिए है।
One person would be wrong. I think we have received praise across the board for many of our foreign policy initiatives at the level of the Prime Minister. And I think, our record speaks for it.
The funny thing is that even though the Foreign Secretary says our record speaks for itself, the world is recognizing India's slow but steady move up the ladder when it comes to maintaining relations with disparate countries with competing interests. But most political parties in India beg to differ, variously calling India's diplomatic outreach useless diplomacy, thoughtless swinging between extremes, and finally directionless altogether. It's another matter that now that there is global recognition of what India has managed to achieve, always putting Indian interests first, the Congress has quickly owned it, calling it a carryover of Nehruji's achievements.
Nehruji articulated this vision of standing firm and alone, if necessary, in the world, to taking our own judgments, respecting our strategic autonomy. And I think it's to India's credit that we have continued this approach and that it's recognized even amongst a hostile neighbor like Pakistan. Today, we have to punch up to our weight. We have weight now in terms of the economy, in terms of our strength.
तो हम अपनी पहचान पहले से ही अलग रखे थे, तो यही पॉलिसी अभी भी चल रही है, तो उसमें ऐसा कौन सा नई नीति नहीं है। ये पुरानी नीति है नॉन अलाइनमेंट जो पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू जी ने शुरू की थी।
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, Dr. Suman C, Raman, political analyst, joining us along with political analyst Tehseen Poonawalla, national spokesperson of BJP, RP Singh. But I want to start with former ambassador to Russia and former foreign secretary Kamal Sibal. Mr. Sibal, your analysis, is this a carryover of Nehruji's diplomatic achievements?
Well, I think that would be falsifying the narrative in a political sense. But the reality, of course, is that a large country like India, with the kind of geopolitical challenges we face, our geography, our neighbors, we always chose to be as independent as we could. And this was the beginning of the policy of non-alignment during the Cold War. Now, Cold War is not there any longer, but the world is still divided because the West dominates the world. We've been making efforts to try and carve out some role for ourselves independent of the West. That's why we joined the RIC dialogue, the SCO, the BRICS and everything else. We've always supported multipolarity. And the intention was, once again, to be able to play a relatively independent role. Now, this is being called strategic autonomy because the non-aligned movement is no longer relevant. And strategic autonomy simply means that we look after our interest primarily, and where we can join with others and we have convergence with them, we will side with them, and where we have differences with them, then we will follow our own path, but in a manner in which we don't create animosities and tensions and confrontation. So in a larger sense, what the opposition is saying is not wrong, that there is a continuity in India's foreign policy. But on the other hand, it is a foreign policy that is being pursued in totally different external circumstances. Our challenges in the meantime have grown, our capacities have grown, and to be able to fashion a policy which meets our national interests as effectively as possible goes to the credit of the government. So let's not get into this whole situation of whether it is because of Pandit Nehru or not because of Pandit Nehru. It's because of India and the position we are in. And any sensible government will ultimately pursue its national interests. The Nehru government committed a lot of mistakes. There's no doubt about it, whether with regard to China or Pakistan or Kashmir or United Nations or what have you. But on the other hand, it goes to their credit that we stood our ground in terms of finding an independent voice for ourselves in international affairs. And that tradition has continued, as I said, in different circumstances. And it goes to the credit of the government and the previous governments who have broadly followed the same line with some mistakes here and there.
And yet, Tehseen Poonawalla, it's for good reason that it's said, failure has many fathers, or pardon me, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan. So whenever there is a Galwan, then it is Mr. Modi's cross to bear. But when you have Russia to America saying that, you know, this is a good thing what India is doing and it's quite commendable, then somehow it is the legacy of Nehruji. Aise kaise?
Good evening, Padmaja, and good evening to all your viewers and to all my fellow panelists. And I agree with what Mr. Sibal has said, and I would like to take it forward. That yes, this is a continuation of India's foreign policy. Of course, the external circumstances are different today, as are India's internal circumstances, because we've added a lot of heft and muscle to the Indian aura, as to speak. So India is a different country from what it was in 1947-48. India has always maintained a position of balance, whether it's been with Iran and Israel. Narasimha Rao opened up relationships with Israel, Israel and Palestine. We've been pro-Palestine, but have been maintained our relationships with Israel. Whether it's been entering the 123 nuclear deal with America, despite not signing the NSG, and yet continuing to trade with Iran on our own terms, despite America saying no and India saying no, we will continue to trade with Iran. So India has maintained an independent foreign policy, and Prime Minister Modi is expected to carry forward that, and he has done that. He has? Mr. Sibal, he has done that.
Let me just pause you for a second.
May I please allow me to make a very important point.
Yes.
But as Mr. Sibal said, Prime Minister Nehru made some mistakes, all governments made some mistakes, as has Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi's mistakes, while he has carried on India's foreign policy, have cost us. It's cost us militarily, especially in China.
So wait,
for 40
let
years.
me try and understand. I want to understand two things which you have said, but they are very mysteriously woven in you, not without stressing. First, you said India now has an aura. What is this mysterious aura you speak of? Why does India have this aura?
This aura that I speak about, and India's rise in global superpower, as a global superpower, happened in 2007-2008 when President Obama said that Dr. Manmohan Singh led world leaders in helping them formulate the double taxation agreement and help the world get out of the 2008 crisis. It also happened during the George Bush-Manmohan Singh era, started by Prime Minister Vajpayee, when India got the 123 nuclear deal.
So just out of curiosity, why is it that an aura acquired in 2007 has led to Russia or say Japan or say Australia in the year 2022 commenting that India indeed has a robust foreign policy and nobody in the Quad has any problem with the stand it has taken?
That's great, and that is important because Quad is Prime Minister Modi's achievement. There is no doubting it that India being a part of Quad is Prime Minister Modi's achievement. Though I personally think, I don't know, please, I have to make
you have returned a changed man from lockup. You are talking about Mr. Modi's achievements now.
No,
this is very worrying.
Criticizing. I'm only returned temporarily. I'm on parole. I have to go back in. But I'm not. I have to still be critical of Mr. Modi.
Right.
While Quad is an achievement of India and Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, we are still not sure whether Quad will militarily interfere with China. And therefore, was making the earlier point when you interrupted me. At Galwan, the entire failure.
So
was
just
Prime
hold on
Minister
for a
Modi's
second.
problem.
Even though you are quite generous in at least conceding that there are achievements in terms of how many countries we have managed to engage with, Here is what our former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, said only in February this year, where he said that essentially what the Prime Minister is doing is forcibly hugging people, and all that we are getting out of it is diddly and squat. Let's listen in.
ये सरकार विदेश नीति दे मोर्चे ते भी पूरी तरह फेल साबित हुई है। चीनी फौजी पिछले एक साल तो साड़ी पवित्र धरती ते बैठे हैं, पर इस पूरे मामले नूं दबाउण दी कोशिश कीती जा रही है। पुराने दोस्त लगातार साडे नालों टुटदे जा रहे हैं। सत्ताधारियों नूं ये समझ आ गई होवेगी कि नेतावां नूं जबरदस्ती जफी पाउण, उन्हां नूं झूठे दवाउण या बिना बुलाए बिरयानी खान पहुंच जाण नाल देश रिश्ते नहीं सुधर सकते।
Suman C, Raman, now it turns out that all those forced hugs, as Dr. Manmohan Singh put it, led to something.
Padmaja, your audio is not coming through very clearly, but if I could say, you spoke about what were the moral standing of India and so on. It is a moral capital that has been built up over decades, and to say that we are actually debating and are expected to feel grateful to the government for having put our national interest first, I mean, seems to me quite bizarre. Obviously,
it is actually, and nobody is saying it is the achievement of this government alone. But explain to me how, if international recognition is built up over decades, then Galwan is not something that has also built up over decades.
No, we are talking about how the world perceives India, and the world does not perceive India or any other.
You're absolutely right, sir. The world's perception has grown over decades, and so has China's animosity. But nobody ever speaks of that. Nobody said after Galwan, oh, this is Chinese aggression which has grown over decades. That started only in 2014.
People very clearly did point out that China has had inimical interest towards India way back from 1962 onwards, and the issues of problems at the border have...
Actually not, sir. Actually not.
Yes.
Immediately after Galwan, the first thing that the Congress, the party that you support, said that this is a result of Modi sleeping at the wheel. Not talking about how, since 62, successive governments were sleeping at the wheel, allowing China to become that aggressive and invasive.
What happened after the 1962 debacle? Heads rolled at various levels in the government, did they not? Therefore, when some loss of territory happens, naturally the government in power is questioned. I mean, I think we are being very, facetious here, because look, the end of the day, the duty of the government is to put national interest first. This government, in this particular case, has put national interest first.
I'm glad at least there is a recognition. I'm glad there is a recognition, because every single time, sir, that there was any foreign engagement, I can show for you all the reactions that came, whether from the Congress, whether from the TMC. It said that you are going and you are piling on to foreign leaders without anything being brought in return. You're saying now that there was an incremental change, and yes, there were policies of the past governments which this government has built on. That is a mature political approach, great. But RP Singh, don't sit here and expect everyone to be grateful to you. You're just doing your job.
BJP as a party, the government led by BJP, are performing their duty toward the nation. They are not performing their duty to allocate certain vote banks or to make certain other friends happy. That's very clear on that. It's nothing like that. Oh, one thing he said, Pakistan is also suffering for terrorism. So poor nation terrorism. So we know that, and I remember Mulayam Singh Yadav also when we did nuclear test here, and Pakistan had to follow the test. Oh, we have to pay him the money. We have to pay poor Pakistan money for doing the nuclear test. And we should not forget, when we got Abhinandan back, what was the message which was sent floated across? And when we revoked the 70-30 way, what was the reaction of Mr. Rahul Gandhi and what was the reaction of the world leaders. Everyone said that, oh, probably world will go against you if you revoke Suman C certificate. So on every account and every occasion, the Prime Minister's foreign policy has proven to be a policy which has independent policy, which is policy for the country, which is policy for betterment of the country. And yes, we have leveraged the economy, we have leveraged the 135 crore people, saying yes, we have this market, so you better know how to deal with us. And if you deal with us, learn how to deal with us at par. It's not that, oh, we'll deal in separate ways with America, we'll deal in separate ways with Russia. For example, none of the politicians have raised the objection of India's policy to Russia, and then we are importing oil from India for betterment of India. So today Tehseen Poonawalla's common policy, thank you to him and thank you to his leaders also if they have given him that line to go. But that has been the Indian policy, and that has been the policy of Prime Minister Modi specific. Okay. When a member of parliament in the Pakistan parliament says that aapki taange kaap rahi thi, he said about the army general of the Pakistan, ki unki taange kaap rahi thi.
Mr. Sibal, would you agree that India is now speaking from a position of strength, definitely better than where it stood maybe 10 years ago? Even in terms of the different engagements that we have, the different groupings.
This is addressed to whom?
Mr. Sibal, to you.
Oh, I would say that Prime Minister Modi has put a very strong mark on our foreign policy. He has built on the achievements of the past, no doubt, but he's carried them much further, and I can explain how. Look at our relationship with the United States. It has always been difficult. There always will remain difficult areas, but look at the manner in which this relationship has become the most important for us and the most wide-ranging. This has not been done at the cost of our relationship with Russia, although US and Russia today are actually now involved in a serious conflict. But US has identified Russia as one of its two adversaries, and yet we have very good relations with Russia, to the point that when the Ukraine crisis has occurred, we have consistently taken a neutral position and have not allowed us to be buffeted by pressures on us from the United States. And if you look at what the Pentagon and the State Department and even the White House are saying, they accept the broad rationale of what we are doing, even though they may not be very happy with this. Look at the Middle East. Look at the transformation of our relationship with UAE and Saudi Arabia. It's remarkable what has happened. And at the same time, look at the expansion of our ties with Israel. In fact, we have anticipated the movement of reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel by some years. And today, UAE and Oman and Morocco and others, they have normalized, Bahrain, they have normalized ties with Israel. Insofar as Japan is concerned, we have built on our past ties with Japan. Prime Minister Kishida was here. You've seen what has happened on the ground. We are members of Quad. We have aligned ourselves with the broad concept of the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, we are members of BRICS. We are members of RIC. We are members of SCO. And nobody is, and everybody is accepting that India has now the heft, the power, the capacity, the international standing to act as a growing world power. And therefore, they have to accept what we do, whether they like it or not.
Tehseen Poonawalla, and just look at how...
One last point.
Yes, sir, please go on. Yes.
You know, we have been ignoring the small island states, the Pacific island states. We've not been making bilateral visits for years to our neighbors, whether Nepal, Sri Lanka, or what have you. But look at the manner in which the Prime Minister has personally filled up these gaps. Even with Australia, he visited Australia after 18 years, after the visit of our previous Prime Minister. So he has put us on the map, and we must recognize that.
He's put us on the map, and look at how there's been a balancing of competing interests. We've got a delegation from UAE in Kashmir even as we speak. And then you have the Israeli Prime Minister who's expected in a few weeks from now. You have us buying oil from Russia at the same time supporting Ukraine and sending them medicines. That's how you balance. That is diplomacy. And when you then sit and say that this man is doing nothing, it just seems facile.
I say that this man is doing nothing. That would be unfair of me to say about the Prime Minister.
Said? The former Congress President Rahul Gandhi has said multiple times, repeatedly, with even more emphasis.
I'm allowed to make my points because I'm here to make my points. And look, it's with people like Mr. Sibal and the administrative service that India's continued its balancing act. Padmaja, in the last segment, I told you India balancing Iran and Israel.
Tehseen Poonawalla, it's quite amusing, though. You would give credit to everyone. You would give credit to the foreign service, to Mr. Sibal, to the diaspora, to the soft power, to the computer engineer. Just say the Prime Minister has...
Please allow me to make my point.
Yes,
I'm on your show. You're just interrupting me.
Everyone but the PM is responsible.
No, I'm not saying that the PM is not responsible. Of course, he heads the government of India. Of course, he's responsible for the growing heft, as is Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also rejected the NATO offer, as is Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who looked at Obama in the eye and said, look, we are going to continue to buy oil from Iran. We balance Iran and America. We balance Saudi and Iran. We balanced Saudi and Israel. At that time, Saudi and Israel were not close as today. Saudi, UAE and Israel have come close. So we've done this balancing act. And one more thing, with Russia, while we are buying oil, we've also continued to buy oil from Venezuela, despite America objecting to us. So let's understand, this is not something new that Prime Minister Modi has done, but congratulations, India's heft has increased. But I want to make a point. If Prime Minister Modi gets credit, and he should, then I want to go back to the point on Galwan. The reason he's criticized on Galwan is simply this. 18 warnings were sent to Prime Minister Modi and Amit Shah ji that there was intrusion in Galwan and they were snoozing over it. That is why Prime Minister Modi is criticized. He's criticized because he told Times Now, na koi gussa hai, na koi guspa hai, and China used the statement to give themselves the clean chit.
Okay, so at least we are at the beginning of a conversation where you're saying, yes, if there has been growth, where there has been any achievement, the government should be credited. But Kamal Sibal, would you agree with the argument that it has been the same throughout? There is nothing exceptional that we've seen happen or any changes that have happened in approach over the last 7 years.
No, I think there have been a lot of changes. On terrorism, we are much tougher. On Pakistan, we've ended up by being much tougher. I mean, don't forget that after the Mumbai terror attacks, which were horrendous, within 6 to 8 months, we were back to dialogue with Pakistan. I mean, this was such a tremendous, from my point of view, folly on our part to have done this. Now, insofar as our other relationships are concerned, we have expanded the horizons of our foreign policy in manner in which it was not done earlier. But let me address this issue. Two things. One, I think Tehseen is not right when he says that we continue to buy oil from Iran. No. We stopped buying oil from Iran altogether. I can understand why, because that was the price we were willing to pay at that time.
That was Prime Minister Modi.
No. This was before. Because of the sanctions imposed on Iran.
But we worked out a rupee deal we worked out a rupee deal in the UK in the bank with the Axis Bank. They could get wheat against our purchase of oil. That was worked out by Prime Minister Modi.
Okay, let's be fair to Prime Minister.
This is by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Let's be fair to Prime Minister.
Insofar as China is concerned, if you look at the visit of the Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang to India, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in power, and look at the joint statement. Apart from the fact that we established a strategic partnership with China, we actually agreed that both of us, that the policies of China in our neighborhood were not a problem for us. It is stated in black and white in the joint statement. And it's amazing that we could have said that. In fact, I said at that time that why are we objecting about China's ingress into our neighborhoods if we are ourselves saying in a joint statement that both countries have a right to pursue their own policies in our neighborhood, and there is no competition in that regard. So a lot of mistakes have been committed vis-a-vis China right from 1954 when we recognized Tibet as a part of China. So therefore, I don't think we should pick up on Galwan and spin a tale around it as if that was the most egregious mistake committed by any government with regard to China. We've not been able to manage our China relationship right from the time when China occupied Tibet, and a lot of mistakes have been committed.
Mr. Sibal, we lost 20 brave hearts for the first time in 40 years.
He stood up to them in Bhutan. He stood up to them also today in Ladakh, where if they have massed 50,000 troops, we have massed 50,000 troops.
Yes.
We've maintained them for 2 winters at great cost to the economy and to our resources, but yet we have shown the grit and determination, and China has learned that lesson. China has learned the lesson that beyond a little nibbling here and there, they cannot afford to take on India. It will be mistaken on their part. And finally, you know, what happened in Galwan or in Ladakh is not simply which is a result of any folly on our part. This is preceded by China challenging the United States even in the South China Sea, where they militarized the islands under the nose of the 7th Fleet, the US military alliances in the region, Japan, and everything else. And they have been pursuing this wolf warrior diplomacy. And if you look at Xi Jinping's policies about the PLA, they must win wars, and how China is going to expand its presence globally to protect its interests, develop this navy, which they have been doing in an unprecedented manner. The challenge from China is not simply because India has committed any mistakes.
And it's not about
nationalist policies, which India is standing up to, and in the only country that is standing up to China. No one else has done that, even the United States of America.
Absolutely. Suman C, Raman, and the bottom line is, it's not just about China. It is about finally having a muscular policy and not waffling, not being pushed around by countries and saying, listen, we need to take this from you, so we will have you push us around. Russia is giving us arms, so we will be pushed to say something against Ukraine. You take a stand now, and you stick to it. If you don't talk to Pakistan, you won't talk to Pakistan.
Padmaja, you have to accept that over the last few years, there have been several mistakes which have been made, but due to larger problems with our neighbors, things seem to be working out. You take Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had a pronounced pro-China tilt. Now their economy is in shambles and they are in deep crisis, so it gives us an opportunity to, to flex our muscles, so to speak, vis-a-vis Sri Lanka. Nepal laid claim on Indian territory at one point of time, in a few years ago. Bangladesh was furious. In fact, if you remember, there was a 6-month or 1-year period in between after the Home Minister called or suggested. Use the term termite to describe, people who
so
had
the
come
Bangladesh
from Bangladesh
that you refer to has 3 days ago profusely thanked India for rescuing its nationals from Ukraine.
Right.
So obviously that's what diplomacy is. That you might have episodes, yet you are very firm on where you stand vis-a-vis your foreign policy. You give them vaccines, you're giving them financial aid, and at the same time you ensure that when it comes to basic humane gestures, your neighbors are with you.
Delegation talk over a period of 1 year if they were delighted. Look, the point is, this is a constantly changing landscape. Nothing is set in stone. And each nation tries to protect its own interests without looking at what has happened in the past beyond a particular point. Therefore, Sri Lanka was more than happy to now come to Delhi and lobby for $1 billion.
Okay.
Which remember, there was talk of a Chinese nuclear submarine docking in Hambantota, right? So what are we talking about? These are things which are changing, and it is true that this government, in the last few months, thanks to larger problems with our neighbors, things have managed to improve.
All right, so things have improved. It is not an achievement of the government. It is because of the larger problems in our neighborhood. It is thanks to Nehruji's policy. It's thanks to our foreign service. Thanks to whatever, at least we are all in agreement that things have improved vis-a-vis our diplomatic engagements, and India does have a diplomatic policy. This acknowledgement in itself is perhaps a huge beginning from being told we hug and then nothing else. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's end on that positive note.